9:30 here in New York. Fox News alert now. The long journey home for what are believed to be some of our fallen heroes appears to be over. The White House saying that North Korea has returned some of the remains of dozens of American soldiers from the Korean War exactly 65 years after the fighting ended. Peter Doocy from the North Lawn of the White House has more on this. Peter, good morning.
Good morning, Bill. A C-17 cargo plane carrying 55 cases of service members' remains left North Korea last night, bound for Osan Air Force Base in South Korea. From there, those cases are going to head to Hawaii for final identification.
Mike Pence, our wonderful vice president, will be there to greet the families and the remains. And I want to thank Chairman Kim for keeping his word. We have many others coming, but I want to thank Chairman Kim in front of the media for fulfilling a promise that he made to me, and I'm sure that he will continue to fulfill that promise as they search and search and search.
So the White House thinks that things agreed to in Singapore, where the president sat down with Kim Jong-un, are starting to come to fruition. We're also getting new word from the Pentagon, where Defense Secretary James Mattis just announced that U.S. troops may soon go back into North Korea to look for more remains.
It was a coordination effort over the last month to be determined where they would deliver the remains to, where our plane would fly in, where they would be taken to for the initial review. So all of that went well, and I think when you have that sort of communication going on, it sets a positive environment, a positive tone for other things, more important things in terms of international diplomacy. But this humanitarian act obviously is a step in the right direction.
So this is seen as a good faith gesture by the Kim regime, but the Secretary of State Mike Pompeo insisted earlier this week the main goal with North Korea is a full and verified denuclearization of the peninsula.
Thank you, Peter. A lot to talk about here. Back with our A-team, Mike Warren, the Juan Williams, and the Charlie Hurd.
Whoa, those were introductions.
I had to wait to the camera to see that. A couple ways to look at this. I mean, a remarkable day for the families. 65 years later, Mike.
Absolutely. And of course, the prisoner of war missing in action, a small but important part of the president's own electoral coalition. This is something he delivered on that he promised he would do. But of course, as Secretary Mattis just pointed out, it's the big questions that are still remaining. In many ways, this is an easy one for Kim and the North Koreans to do this, to allow this to happen. And, of course, it's the North Koreans. We should verify that these really are the remains. If there are more remains.
It could take years before we really find out the result of that.
That's right. So, yeah, there's still bigger issues. The denuclearization, I think, is such a big ask. This is a much smaller ask, much easier ask. Maybe it sets it on the right path, though.
But should this at least, Juan, calm some of the president's critics that nothing came out of that meeting with Kim Jong-un?
Well, first of all, I just think, for America, it's just a good moment. The war's long over, beyond my lifetime, beyond yours for sure. But I think all of us have a sense that when men and women go out and fight for us, we stay with them and we want to bring them home. And we owe that to the families. I say owe, but I mean, I think it's just part of who we are. So I like this. I like it a lot. And I think for President Trump, who loves individual relationships, it must signal to him something positive about what's going on with Kim Jong-un, because what I've read in the papers is that he's been frustrated at the lack of progress in terms of Secretary Pompeo at the State Department being able to negotiate and bring to fruition the bigger picture on denuclearization of North Korea.
But to answer your question, nothing will calm his critics. They will keep it up. But I don't think you can overstate the importance of something like this. We talk about in Washington all the time. People talk about how fast things are. You can't keep up with the news. Well, and they are going very fast in the political world. But my goodness, in the global world, things are going at hyperspeed right now. And I know that Donald Trump sort of makes people a little bit nervous because sometimes he says things that aren't exactly right, or he has missteps here and there. but I mean, he's a game changer. And he's willing to throw things up in the air and see where they land and try to reorganize things. And to me, that's the most appealing thing about the guy on the global stage, a willingness to go sit down with Kim Jong-un. I mean, see what happens. And yeah, it's a little bit uncomfortable and a little bit, but my goodness, if you stand still and don't do anything, you're toast in this world.
Well, my feeling on the Singapore thing is that you had to restart this relationship. And if you're going to take small steps here and small steps there, well, eventually they can lead to big things.
Huge.
I'm not saying that North Korea is going to give up its nukes someday. It may never come to that.
But
you
the
don't
goal.
have any more. Clearly, it is. You don't have any more testing. No more missiles are fired. It seems like a red-hot situation has been cooled for now.
Yeah, cooled for now. I think that's an accomplishment in and of itself. And the question ultimately to me is, will the administration's own stated policy of complete denuclearization ever come to fruition? Have these steps moved us closer to that? I don't think we have a good answer on that. I think the small steps are certainly good at cooling from where that really hot moment was about a year ago. But the nuclear program for North Korea is so fundamental to its own conception of itself as a state that it's not going to be easy.
Going back to his grandfather.
That's absolutely true.
Let's talk about Twitter, shall we, gentlemen?
Shadow banning? Is it? I mean, is this a legitimate concern? The president has been tweeting about it.
I think there's no doubt about it that it's, and I think that the social media organizations are admitting that it is a problem. Although their
Twitter has
explanations
said that they're changing their policy.
What is it?
It has to do with when you're searching for somebody who is a conservative or a Republican, and it makes it more difficult to find.
If their name auto-populates or not. And in this case, they're saying if you are a conservative like Jim Jordan or the head of the RNC, Ronna McDaniel, their name does not automatically populate in the search field.
Now, you talk about grievance politics by Republicans. This, to me, is a quintessential example. I mean, it's no shortage of conservative...
Easy for you to say, Juan.
No, it is not. I'm going to say to you this. If it was the case that they were saying we're blocking some conservative leader, I would say, oh, that's terrible. But what this is as you described it, Sandra, it's about a drop-down bar, and it's an algorithm.
It's social media picking and choosing who you have access to.
If there was a person, if you were saying to me that the president of Twitter or whatever said, you know, I don't like these conservatives, and therefore I'm going to, but that's not what happened.
Yeah, the terminology, though, is a little confusing. So shadow banning is the idea that when you post something in a public forum, you're the only one who can see it, that somehow they have manipulated the algorithm so that nobody else sees it. But this is not exactly what's happened with Twitter, so it's a little bit of a problem with terminology where the term has been appropriated to mean you don't show up in this. But I agree with you, Juan, that, well, first of all, the other thing is that there's been some pretty far left folks who have also not popped up in this search bar. So it seems to me that Twitter's algorithm picks out people who are controversial. I'm not saying that's right. It just seems to be that Twitter has a lot of problems.
A big defense against hate speech, against bullying, against harassment, and I think, but again, to your point, it's no shortage of conservative sites that are easily accessible and conservative commentary.
Well, Ronna McDaniel took issue with it. I mentioned her earlier, head of the RNC, and here she is expressing her frustration.
I think they still have more work to do to clear up why were conservatives being banned, why are they using shadow banning, and this is important to all of their users, and it's important to our political dialogue that the thought police of Silicon Valley are not determining what voices get through on their social media platforms.
And the president tweeted, shadow banning prominent Republicans, not good. We will look into this discriminatory and illegal practice at once. Many complaints.
Well, I'm glad to hear you, Juan, have a problem with grievance politics. We can agree. Yes. If we could just do away with it altogether. But the larger issue is, and you know, when you go on to, I've never been on Facebook, and I try not to go on Twitter because it's just appalling. But when you do go on there and you see the way they aggregate news, I mean, it's egregious how reliably sort of left-wing or sort of out of touch with mainstream sort of regular Americans those feeds are, and it's completely useless.
Come on, you're on Twitter.
I'm on there, but I don't. I'm yeah, but I'm on there defensively.
He's a lurker. Can I put a shine on this? Maybe that you can look at this the other way and say, hey, maybe it will prompt these people to stay off Twitter, because no good can come from being on Twitter.
Sometimes
you're wasting
not.
time at work and all those things.
Thank you, Mike. Good to see you in New York. All right, Juan?
I'm going to tweet you now.
See you, Charlie.
See you.
So amid all the talk about the Russia